Hi, friends. This is Wendy Harrop, and welcome to the Say Yes to Yourself podcast. On the Say Yes to Yourself podcast, you'll hear stories from women just like us who are adding the practice of saying yes in their daily lives in big and small ways, and as a result, are experiencing the truth that everybody wins when you say yes to yourself. Saying yes to yourself is a graceful unfolding, an intentional becoming of the very best version of you. It is my hope that in these conversations, we are able to find our truth and be inspired and empowered to live our very best lives. I'm so excited to go on this journey with you, and I look forward to finding a bit of our own story in each other's. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. You'll have to excuse the change in my voice. I am working my way through a little sickness that's running through our house right now, but it's conversations like the one you're about to hear that just pull me back to my happy place, and I'm so excited to share today's conversation with you. I am still in the throes of all things France, which is kind of where I like to hang out anyway. And so today's conversation is with one of the collaborators for our 2024 France trips. This one for the Paris Versailles trip, which is September 14th to the 19th. And one of the dreamy excursions is with Cynthia Coutu of Delectables. She is essentially empowering women one bottle of champagne at a time, which is amazing. And as this particular trip is for couples, she is opening her arms to gentlemen to join on this excursion because they are accompanied by a woman. Which is so fabulous. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Cynthia Coutu is Canadian and has been living in Paris for over 30 years. She obtained a BA in Fine Arts Photography in Canada, then came to France to do a master's in art history at the Sorbonne. Her love of wine and cheese kept her in France. After working at the Canadian Embassy in France and the OECD for 20 years, managing their digital communications, she hung up her international civil servant hat and pursued her passion. She studied wine at l'Académie du Vin and École de Vin and a certified wine and spirits education trust level 3 with merit. She then specialized in champagne, the king of wines and the wines of kings. She founded Delectables, a champagne networking club for women. She hosts champagne workshops in Paris, judges wine contests, and loves taking people to visit her favorite producers in Champagne. She only uses champagnes made by women and only takes guests to visit champagne houses where women play an important role. It is her small way of supporting women in the male-dominated wine industry. She has been mentioned in Le Monde, France 24, New York Times, and Paris Match, and interviewed for numerous podcasts, including The New Paris with Lindsay Tramuto. Cynthia was also voted Best Wine Tasting in Paris, Best Wine Experience in Paris, Wine Expert of the Year by Luxury Travel Guide Global Awards, and the Top 50 Wine Experiences in the World by Wine Magazine. Unique Wine Experience of the Year by Corporate Livewire. She is currently researching the role of women in history of champagne for a book project. She is a fount of knowledge and just a delight to talk to. I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation, and it is going to make you want to run out and find a favorite somebody so that you both can join us in Champagne this September. So pop that cork and take a listen to my exciting conversation with Cynthia Coutu. Cynthia, I am so happy to be in your presence again. Thank you so much in advance for being here and for your time today.
It really is my pleasure. I wish I was actually back in Paris, popping a cork and recording this while sipping champagne. But it's
Mm,
9 o'clock in the morning here in Canada. So um, I just had my coffee. Hope it kicks in, but it's a pleasure for me as well.
thank you. Well, and it is my preferred place is drinking champagne in Paris with you. So I am with you in spirit, and at the appropriate time, we can do that.
I hope so.
Perfect. So, I would love to start our conversation with the way that I start the majority of these conversations, and that is by asking, how are you saying yes to yourself in this season?
By season, do you mean like right now or the season of my life, or it's up to me to
It's up to
interpret?
you. You get to
All
say
right.
whatever you want.
Um, I was actually chatting with my parents last night, and they see how happy I am now, and how they know how miserable I was
Mm.
before.
Hmm.
I was an international civil servant for 16 years. I worked managing the digital communications for a very large international organization called the OECD. They're like a think tank for governments. And I would say I spent 95% of my time dealing with big egos and
Mm.
a lot of politics. And I was one of the few women in senior management. And so there were those struggles. And at the time, I was also a single working mother. So I had a lot on my plate, and I had every stress related illness. I came down with
Mm.
shingles, kidney stones. I twisted and broke bits of my body.
Mm.
And a few, I guess, a few days before my 50th birthday, there was a reorganization of the communications department. And I had given my 2 cents worth about what I thought should be done in respect to digital communications, which was basically dividing my job in three. And a few days before my 50th birthday, my colleagues were getting nervous about the reorg. They were hearing rumors about positions being cut, and management was doing everything you're not supposed to do, being very secretive and not transparent, and so on. And so they kind of tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to voice their concerns. So I requested a meeting and went into the meeting thinking I was there to discuss some of the concerns. And that's when they told me that they were taking my advice and splitting my job in three and described the three new positions. And I said, I'm a bit confused. Are you telling me that I could do either or neither of these new positions? And they looked at me in the eyes and said, neither. We don't think you have the skills. And I laughed out loud because I knew that it was any other reason but that. And they gave me 10 months' notice. And there was an all staff meeting that afternoon. And they told me, yes, and we'd understand if you don't want to go to the meeting this afternoon. I was just laughing. And, anyways, I
I
had
am
10 months,
speechless, and I have so much to say about that.
but
Rat bastard comes to mind first.
and my director didn't even have the courage to attend the meeting. And, anyways, I had 10 months to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I was leaving with a really nice package.
Good.
At the beginning, I was kind of panicky and thinking my priority was to find a way to stay in France because I had semi diplomatic status. And
Mm,
so in 10 months, my diplomatic visa would run out. And I had a daughter, didn't want to leave France and separate her from her father, her friends, her school, and so on.
sure.
So that was my number one priority. Excuse me. And At the beginning, I was looking for similar jobs in similar organizations. And then all of a sudden, I was like, hang on a second. I don't want to do this anymore. And I had the luxury of knowing that I would get a very decent pension from the OECD at age 60.
Oh,
Okay,
good.
so in my head, I realized, okay, I've got 10 years where I could do something that makes me happy, you know? And
What a
my,
concept.
well, it was a culture shift for
Right.
me.
For sure.
And I have a sister, I have two sisters, one that lives in Scotland and one that lives in Paris. And the one who lives in Paris and I are very, very close. And she said, well, wine, why don't you do something related to wine? That's what's kept you in France all of these years, wine and cheese. So that was the little light bulb that
Mm,
went off in my head. And I thought I knew a lot about wine, but I figured it would be better if I had a piece of paper to prove it.
sure.
So I did my homework and looked at what wine schools were out there, what types of certifications. Like I knew I didn't want to be a sommelier working on a restaurant floor. That wasn't compatible with my lifestyle as a single mother.
Right.
And I had waitress to put myself through university and been there, done that, and was not doing it again.
Right.
And so I signed up for the Wine and Spirit Education Trust program. It's kind of like the gold standard for anyone who wants to work in the wine industry. And I realized, and it's internationally recognized. And so I skipped level one, aced level two, and then level three was a whole different ballgame. The
Mm,
people in my class were restaurant owners, certified sommeliers, like the best sommelier of South America was in my class,
wow.
people who manage wine portfolios for LVMH. So they were already professionals. And
Sure.
so that's who I was with. And while I was at wine school, I realized two important things. One is the more you learn about wine, the more you realize there is to learn because it touches on everything: history, geography, geology, chemistry, culture. And so after my level three, I decided, okay, I want to specialize in sparkling wines, more as an intellectual challenge. Because as you know, because you've attended one of my workshops,
Yes.
Champagne is probably one of the most complex wines because it can be a blend of grape varieties, of plots, of villages, of years, of different vessels used to make the wine. And I know on my tombstone it'll be written, still learning about Champagne. Um,
A
so,
noble goal.
yeah. And the other important lesson was just how male dominated the
Mm,
wine industry was in France. And, for me, as a woman in the wine industry in France, it was already a big challenge. But as a foreign woman in wine, it was an uphill battle for me at the beginning. So I had
sure.
that in the back of my mind. And I started seeking out other female wine professionals. And I went to a tasting organized by Femmes de Bourgogne, which is an association of 12 female winemakers in Burgundy that support each other.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful.
they problem solve, like, oh, I've got this problem. How did you solve it? What would you do? And they organize professional tastings as a group. And that way they give each other more visibility as a whole and they
Sure.
support each other. And I was chatting with I knew that I wanted to look for a crémant, which is a sparkling wine from Burgundy
Hmm.
made by a woman. And so I was at this tasting and I got chatting with one of the women and I said, so who makes the best crémant? And she said, oh, you have to talk to Agnes. And I'm like, wow, if I was at mixed or men only producers, they probably, if I asked that question, they'd probably say, well, mine, of course.
Right.
But the women were humble enough to say, you know
Mm,
what? There's a woman here who makes much better crémant than I do.
wow.
And we got to talking about the difference between men and women when it comes to wine tasting. And she said that men were more interested in the technical information, like what percentage of grape varieties and all of that stuff, and that they use their knowledge as power.
Mm.
Okay? She said the number of dudes that come to my stand and start mansplaining to me how I make my wine, she says it's nuts. Okay.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And I said, well, what about women? And she said that in mixed company, women were often intimidated or bored.
Mm.
And that gave me the idea, almost like a social experiment. What would happen if I did women only tastings and to give them sort of a safe space to explore? Okay?
Right.
So at that stage, I decided I wanted to only use sparkling wines made by women and keep it women only workshops and events. And then, so that was at wine school and shortly after. And then while I was at wine school, I was also asked to teach an international MBA class. And I had 20 students, 19 of them were young women, and one guy, and he had quite the harem. And after, like during breaks and after class, these young girls would come and see me and ask for advice. Like, can you take a look at my LinkedIn profile? Oh, I've got this really difficult manager. How would you deal with this situation? And I was thinking, wow, there's a lot of young girls there that could benefit from some mentoring or coaching or something. I had that in the back of my mind.
Sure.
And then I had some more free time. And so I was meeting women my age, early 50s, that had been there, done that, saw the movie, got the t shirt. They had basically climbed the social ladder or made a name for themselves in whatever business they were involved. Their kids were pretty much grown up, and they were sitting on mountains of experience and knowledge.
Mm.
And they were at this stage in their lives where they wanted to give back and they wanted to do something that had more meaning. Okay, so that's what was going on my first sort of 10 months after leaving the OECD. And I connected the dots and I created Delectable, which I often have to explain to English speakers. Delect means to savor, and bulle means bubbles.
Love
And
it.
this was 6 years ago, I guess. And initially, it was supposed to be a champagne networking club for women. And the idea with champagne was the pretext to get younger and older women together and share. And at my very first event, I realized that the women could tell me if they preferred Champagne X or Champagne Y, but they didn't understand why.
Mm.
Okay. And so I designed a workshop specifically geared towards women to give them the tools and the confidence to better understand what style of champagne they prefer and why, and how to get the best bang for their buck. Because
Mm.
70% of champagne is purchased by women. Okay? And what I've realized in the last 6 years since I've been doing that is women are just as interested in the technical information, but to empower themselves. Okay.
Yes.
It's not to show off and say, look how much I know or how big
Right.
mine is. It's, I want to know what I like and why, how to get the best bang for their buck. And also, if I'm having guests and serving food, I want to know what champagne pairs better, what mistakes not to make, how
Right.
to please my guests, and how to please myself. Okay. So they're interested in the technical information, but not for the same reasons.
Right.
And so that is how I sort of started Delectable. And then I did that for 6 months. And then the women who attended my workshops were like, Cynthia, could you take us to visit some of these female producers that we've tried? And I'm like, sure. And so that's how I ended up getting into wine tourism, taking women to meet the women behind the bottles.
Mm.
And then it was really taking off, and the pandemic hit. And so I was like, oh, but because I had over 20 years experience in digital communications, I was doing digital virtual tastings and virtual history lessons about champagne within 10 days of lockdown.
Brilliant.
And because I was one of the first, I was mentioned in the New York Times, in Paris Match, Le Monde, all of these in the press. And so for, I guess, about a year or so, I was doing mostly virtual, and travel advisors and planners and journalists were attending. And a lot of the travel advisors were like, "Oh, we love you. As soon as travel opens up again, we want you to take people to Champagne." And so when travel opened up, it's been basically nonstop.
Oh my
um,
gosh, it's such a
I,
dream. I love this so much, Cynthia.
I get paid to drink champagne. So that's my yes. I'm happy. I don't have to deal with big egos. I get to meet with women who have a long family history of making champagne. You know, I'm Canadian living in Paris. I get stir crazy sometimes when I'm not out in nature. And I get to go hop, skip, and jump in the vineyards on a regular basis. So I'm in nature. I'm drinking champagne. I'm telling the stories of the women behind the bottles, and I get to meet so many amazing women doing what I do.
I feel like my heart has grown 3 sizes as you have told this beautiful, beautiful story. I I could not be more thrilled for you. I could not be more grateful for showing all of us what's available for us in just knowing yourself, knowing what delights you, saying yes to yourself, and then taking inspired action without figuring out. You didn't create, I don't believe, you didn't mention it in your story, you didn't create an entire business plan that's centered around a champagne networking group and then limit yourself to just that one thing. You did what felt right, and then it led to the next thing, which you said yes to, which led to the next thing, which you said yes to. And now you're twirling around in a vineyard doing what you love, cashing your checks all day long. It's just, it's so beautiful and expansive. And I love that you are not just keeping it to yourself, that you are sharing it with the world, that you're inviting others into your beautiful slice of heaven. It's just a dream.
And there's all kinds of ways of measuring success. Me, it's not euro signs or dollars. That's not what motivates me. It's, for example, when someone in Champagne tells me that I've taught them something, I'm like, yes.
Mm.
It's when a woman that's attended one of my workshops learning about champagne tells me that I inspired them to give up their corporate job that made them miserable. And it could be macrame, it could be art, it could be anything, but that my story inspired her to go and be happy and say yes to herself.
Mm.
So there's do you know the statue, the fearless girl that was
No,
on Wall Street?
no.
So finance and Wall Street's a male dominated industry as well. And there was someone who worked in, I have to backtrack a bit. I was
Sure.
invited to lead an icebreaker workshop in Berlin at, it's called the Global Female Leaders Summit. And it's kind of like a Davos for women. So there were female CEOs, European trade ministers, like really powerful and successful women. And they had like 3 days of conferences and lectures. But I was asked to lead an icebreaker session the night before everything started. Like when you go to a conference, unless you have an alpha personality and you go up,
Right.
hi, I'm Wendy, I'm Cynthia.
Right.
So the chairwoman of this summit had heard about what I do and said, look, can you come up with some kind of um, way of getting these women to get to know each other before we start the serious business? And I said, okay, give me 48 hours, and I'll get an idea while I'm brushing my teeth. Just
Right.
give me a few days. And I got back to her with this idea. And she kept going on to me about how passionate I was. And
Mm.
I'm like, what? Like, I realized it was my blind spot. Like, I'm the type of
Mm.
person that when I do something, I give everything I've got.
Right.
But she kept going on about how passionate I was. And I was like, really? Like, I don't know. It got me thinking about what passion is.
Mm.
And so I had 40 women in my group. And I sat down with the organizer the night before because she knew who these women were, and I said, okay, I'm going to divide them into three groups. Okay, the three main grape varieties
Oh,
used to
great.
make champagne, so Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier. And I need your help telling me what woman do you think would benefit from having a more intimate chat or getting to know. So we just used our noses to,
Sure.
okay, it would be cool if this trade minister met this one or that. And so when they arrived, they were given a name tag with a grape variety. And I explained that it was one of the three grape varieties. And I said, your task, I suppose you were a Chardonnay, you had to go find the other Chardonnays in the room, ask them what their passion is,
Mm.
and if that passion has helped them or hindered them to get to where they are today.
Oh, interesting.
So I kind of forced them to do a deep dive. And it was because I was thinking about this whole passion thing. And so they did that for 20 minutes. And then I introduced myself, explained who I was, what I was doing, and that I had brought some champagne made by a woman. I told her story, and she had some obstacles and challenges to deal with
Mm.
in taking over the champagne house. So I told her story, showed them how to open a bottle safely and how to pour safely. And then they had bottles on their tables, and they had to open the bottles and pour them themselves. And then I let them get on with their networking. But one, and I told some stories about the role of women in the history of champagne. Okay, there's some key innovations, and they were all made by women. And so I told a few of those examples. And one of the women at this icebreaker was the women behind the whole project of getting this statue of a little girl looking up defiantly at the buildings on Wall Street. And it's called The Fearless Girl. And after the icebreaker, she was like, Cynthia, you need to write a book about the role of women in the history of champagne. Okay,
Yes.
so that's another one of my projects that I'm working on, because the more I was learning about champagne, the more I discovered about the role of women in the history of champagne. And this woman who attended the workshop, the icebreaker, was like, you need to write a book about this. And so that's what I'm also doing on the side. And every so often,
You
like
have so
during
many sides.
well, not actually not that many, but every so often I do webinars, like a virtual where I share my research notes. So, for example, on the 18th of February, which is close to Valentine's, I figured I'll do like a Galentine's for whoever wants to come hang out with me online and learn about women in Champagne from the 18th century until today. They can pop a bottle made by a woman and learn about some of these innovations.
Oh my gosh, I love that. We will definitely link that in the show notes. That sounds amazing. So I mean, I already know where to get my champagne because I'm still working through my advent calendar.
Oh,
But
you ordered one. Okay, great.
oh my gosh, I love that whole concept.
Mhm.
It's beautiful. So friends, if you haven't seen my posting about that on Instagram, there is a champagne advent calendar from this small producer. And Cynthia, tell us more about her and her family and all of that goodness, please.
So Christine is
Mm-hmm.
10th generation
Mm.
grower. And up until her grandfather, they used to grow grapes and sell them to the big champagne houses. And her grandfather decided, you know what? I'm going to make my own champagne. Instead of selling the grapes, I'll use them to make my champagne. And they had one daughter, Christine's mother, who married a Spanish immigrant's son. And they decided to take over and really grow the business. And they had two daughters, one who had I don't know if she's autistic. I can't remember if it's
Mm,
physically or mentally, but she's challenged.
okay.
And the parents were ready to retire.
Mm,
And Christine was a journalist specialized in the environment, and her husband was a web developer. And her parents asked her, look, either we sell or you take over.
oh,
And Christine and Vincent were like, do we want to do this? And Christine said, okay, we'll come. And this was in 2008, under one condition, that you give us freedom and independence, that you're not
mm,
hovering, second guessing all of our decisions, because that's a really big challenge for like multi-generational family businesses. They have
sure.
different value systems, different priorities, and so on. And so Christine and Vincent took over in 2008 and really, well, built it up. But so how to explain this simply? The concept of grower champagne is that you make your own champagne with grapes that you grow. Okay.
Okay.
And to have the legal status of récoltant manipulant, so grow, you harvest and manipulate, you have to grow the grapes and you have to disgorge the bottles to remove
Okay.
the dead yeast at the end. But you
Hmm.
can outsource some of the other steps like pressing the grapes and so on.
Oh, okay.
But consumers have no way of knowing who does everything from A to Z,
Right.
growing the grapes, harvesting, pressing them, vinifying, blending, disgorging, and all of that. So there's an association called the Independent Champagne Producers, and there's about 400 members,
Okay.
and they do everything from A to Z.
Wow.
And then there's this little logo. Like if you look on I don't know if it's on the advent calendar or not, but the members usually have this logo on their regular bottles or their cases or website. And Christine is the first woman to be elected president of this
Wow.
association.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and so she's a nutcase because she's very creative, likes experimenting. And, most champagne producers might have 5, 6 different blends. She's got 16. Okay.
Yes.
She does
Yes.
single plots like, oh, what would happen if I tried this or that? And so she loves to experiment. She loves to challenge herself. And so she's the only one out there that makes this advent calendar of mini bottles. There's enough for 2 glasses in each bottle. And she included 13 of the 16
Yes.
cuvées. And you get 24 little bottles. And it's great, as you know,
I
to.
do know it's remarkable. It's so good. So how do, besides me knowing how to source my female produced champagne, how can we know that we are supporting female run champagne houses when we're just at our local wine shop.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I realized with Delectable and talking to women is that suppose there were two Blanc de Blanc champagne, so a white champagne made from white grapes only, one made by a man, one made by a woman. The women have told me we would be more than happy to
Mhm.
support the female made, female owned, but we don't know who they are.
Right.
So I use social media to tell the stories about the women behind the bottles. You know, like you follow me on Instagram, like
Yes.
there's one out of 100 photos of me because I hate getting my picture taken. Despise selfies. I much prefer to tell the stories of the women behind the bottles. And I started compiling a list, which is available on my website. And
Perfect.
I say, okay, if you're living in France, you can buy directly from here, from there. If you're in the States, you can go through this importer, or you can import directly through the producer, like Christine, who makes this advent calendar. You
Yes.
can order directly from her. Some of the other smaller producers, the only way is through Iola Wines, which
Okay.
so one of the things that I realized is I was introducing all kinds of Americans to these champagnes and the producers, but they weren't available in the States. And so they'd get
Right.
almost mad and disappointed that, oh, you got me to try. I love this and I can't get it. Like you're torturing me.
Right.
Well, I realized there was a missing link. And I started reaching out to my connections in the wine world in the States and said, look, I've got like 5 or 6 female producers that I know a lot of Americans would buy from you if it was available. And they'd say, oh, tell them to send samples. But sending samples there's a lot of paperwork and
Sure.
it's an investment, and you don't even know if they're going to end up importing. And then Marilee, who is based in Seattle, who runs Iola Wines, found me.
Okay.
She only imports French and Canadian wines, French and Italian wines made
Okay.
by women. Okay. So
We
she
love
looked at
her.
the list on my website and started going to meet all of these producers, falling in love with them, and now imports all of my favorite champagnes made by women that I introduce to Americans through my workshops or by actually visiting them in Champagne. So, of course, she doesn't import all of the 16 cuvées from Christine,
Right.
but she looks at which ones are successful, which ones she thinks people in the States would be interested in, or which ones whatever. And so right now I think there's like 7 or 8 states that she can sell directly to, and her goal for before the end of this year is to pretty much sell to all states except for maybe like Hawaii and Alaska or something like that. And she sent me a message last week saying that that's her priority, is to be able to ship and sell to the remaining states.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, we will link everything to her in the show notes as well. We are just hooking everybody up. This is so great. Now, you mentioned that I have done one of your workshops and it was phenomenal in your beautiful Parisian apartment, which is so fun and dreamy because all of the women that go on my trips, we're walking around, we're enjoying the beautiful architecture, but really in our hearts, we want to go inside. We want to know what it looks like in there.
Poke
So
your nose
having,
around.
right? So having these small groups that I take, and this year I'm trying something new and opening it up to couples, but I'm sure the couples want to look inside also. But having these small groups has allowed me to experience these beautiful experiences, opportunities with these different curators in their private homes.
Mhm.
And that's been such a dream and such a delight for me. And I'm really thrilled that we're going to be seeing you in September for our Paris trip. But we're going to do something, one of two fantastic things when we're with you in September. Will you share about one of the two options that we have, depending on how all the stars aligned and when grapes are ready to be harvested and all that good stuff?
Oh, yes.
Thank
So,
you. Because you
um,
say it more elegantly than I do.
so one of my favorite times to bring people to Champagne is during harvest. Okay, because these friends of mine who make their own champagne, they work all year growing their grapes to make them healthy and tasty. And harvest dates are regulated in Champagne. You can't just
Mm,
pick when you want. There's so many rules and regulations in Champagne, but it's like a beehive in Champagne during harvest. And they have to bring in an extra 100,000 people to pick the grapes manually, which is another way of doing quality control as well. Because if you see a bunch that's got rot, or you skip that and you go to the next bunch, so that's how everything's done manually. And there aren't enough people in Champagne to do it, so they bring in 100,000 people.
wow.
But because most of these producers have become my friends, and I know their place is like my second home. Like they joke, yeah, we should put a cot here for you when you come and stay.
Yes, please.
Um, Normally, tourists or visitors are not welcome during harvest
Sure.
because it's like, imagine all hell breaking loose. Okay, you need
Right.
to pick the grapes, you need to press them and make sure the grapes aren't sitting outside in the sun, and that it's rolling and everything is, they don't have time to give you a tour of the cellars or anything like that. So
Sure.
because I know the places inside out, they let me bring people, and you get to taste the juice fresh off the press.
Mm,
Depending on the dates, one of my friends does this like picker for the day experience. It's more like a half day, but you go and spend 2 hours in the vineyards. You're taught how to pick. It's not backbreaking hard work, you know. You do that for an hour. But you get a sense of what it's like to pick grapes in Champagne. Then you go to the press room. You see how they're pressed, how the juice is fractioned. You get to taste the juice fresh off the press, and then you go to the cell. I do the tour of the cellars and so on to see what the show what the next steps are and explain all the steps in the production. So it's my favorite time of the year to bring people, but it's difficult to predict the dates because
sure.
every year is different. It depends if you've had a hot summer, a cold summer, rain, nah, nah, nah. And so I usually only know really 10 days before when they're going to start picking.
Right.
But I usually have people on waiting lists and say, okay, if you aim towards 15th of September, like a few days before, a few days after, then I I can almost guarantee you'll get to either experience the beginning, the middle, or the end of harvest. I can't say exactly when, but everyone that I've taken during harvest, they're just like, oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so dreamy. I'm super excited, and I'm sure everyone listening is asking, where do I sign up? Where do I sign up? Which, of course, we will link all of that in the show notes also. That trip is September 14th to 19th. And so, if our day with you is not the proper day to be a picker for the day, what is our plan B? Because you had a beautiful itinerary set for that.
Um, I mean, it's highly likely that people would be they people will still be harvesting around that date. Okay? I'm
Sure.
pretty sure. But the picker for the day might not be possible. But I would choose places where they're still picking, where you get to taste the juice fresh off the press and see all the beehive in the vineyards, in the cellars. I would know who is doing what when
Sure.
by then. And so I can guarantee that whoever comes that day will have fun, whether it's picking or not picking.
Right.
But
A
it will
dreamy
be,
experience
yeah.
regardless. Oh,
And I'm
fantastic.
more into slow tourism. So it's not about going to a gazillion different champagne houses and
Yeah.
rushing and all of that. There will be hiking involved, getting to the vineyards because they're out in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, it would be a nice day out. And the feedback that I get, and even if you look on Google reviews, everyone, they don't complain, but they're like, oh my God, Cynthia is a fount of knowledge. I learned so much.
I bet.
Whether it's about the vineyards or the history or the politics in Champagne or whatever, there's, I touch on everything, food pairings, whatever. And so I've realized that I do this huge brain dump on people. And after a
Sure.
couple of glasses of champagne, they're like, what did she say about serving temperature or who invented the first dry champagne? So I have sort of cheat sheets that after every workshop or every trip, I send a free PDF as follow up with, the historical highlights explaining who Joan of Arc was, why she was important in Champagne, or who invented what when. And so people use those afterwards, like, oh yeah, I,
That's
they
brilliant.
can look it up, and it's just like the key facts, like a cheat sheet.
Right. That's so gracious of you. And it also just allows everyone to really be present and experience what's in front of them without feeling like they're
Taking
cramming for
notes.
a test. Yeah. Like it's all
Yeah.
okay. And you can come back. It's okay if you don't retain all this information. It's all so good.
Mm.
Even the workshop that we did with you, there was so there were so many beautiful tidbits, but I still don't recall how to properly open the bottle. So I obviously have to come back. And I've opened thousands of bottles in my life. So I do keep the cage on now and turn the bottle, not the cork and cage, but I don't remember how to put my finger in the wires of the cage the way that you suggested and taught us how to do it. So I'm really looking forward to my refresher course, and I intend to be back many, many times until I master it.
I do get a lot of repeat visitors because there's just so much to learn. And that's the other way of measuring success is how many people book me for a second trip to Champagne or a second workshop. And so, there are quite a few that have come back, so you won't be alone.
That's great. And it's you really take so much of the mystery out of the learning process, but also there is zero pretense. And I appreciate that so much. And it is a joy to bring people to you and to introduce the new people to you as well. So I really appreciate all that you're doing. It's a dream. I would love that job myself, but instead I'll just be your client. But thank you so much. Please tell everybody where they can follow you, how they can get in touch with you if they're not joining me in September. What do you want people to know?
As I mentioned on social media, it's rarely selfies. Every time I post, I try to share either a piece of history, a piece of useful information for pairing champagne with food, or you, so if people want to follow me on Instagram or Facebook, it's at Delectable, the company name. If you want that list of champagne producers and houses where women play an important role, it's on the homepage of my website, delectable.com. And if people want to connect professionally with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Cynthia Coutu. and I answer emails extremely quickly. That's one of my reputations. And it's because before working at the OECD, I used to work at the Canadian Embassy in the press department. And journalists always need information for yesterday. And
That's
so
right.
that's part of my leftover is I reply as quickly as possible. Also because I'm sort of postmenopausal, and if I don't do it right away, then I'll forget about it. So,
Oh, that's so funny. I have a similar way of doing things. I was a wedding planner for 30 years, and I know a bride is thinking about her wedding when she's thinking about her wedding. And when she reaches out to me, she wants to already know the answer. So I would also respond. If I'm looking at midnight, then I'm going to reply at midnight. And like you now, I have two speeds: right now or not at all. So if I get an email, I need to do it right now, or it's just not happening.
yeah, it goes, whoop,
Oh,
gone.
that's right. That's right. And hopefully it'll come back, but most likely not. Well, thank you so much. I really have appreciated your time, and I love this conversation, and I cannot wait for September.
Well, I'm looking forward to welcoming you and your guests with arms wide open, a glass of champagne, and I can guarantee that I can pretty much guarantee they'll have fun and learn tons no matter what we end up doing together.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay? And cheers to you. And in the meantime, onwards and upwards like a champagne bubble.
Oui, madame. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. As always, any links or notes mentioned can be found at phineaswrighthouse.com in the podcast section of our site, or in the show notes below. And if you haven't connected with me personally, come find me on Instagram at Phineas Wrighthouse and let me know you listened to this episode. I'd love to get to know you. Thank you for sharing this time with me. I know your days are full, and I'm really grateful that you chose to spend some of your precious time right here. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any of these delightful conversations. I'll see you next week.